There are some passages in the Bible that people highlight in yellow ink. And then there are passages like Judges 19, the kind most people skip over, the kind that never makes it to the vacation Bible school curriculum, the kind that leaves you sitting there wondering, what in the world did I just read? A woman is abused and abandoned, dies at the doorway, and then her body is cut into 12 pieces and sent across Israel like a political statement. And maybe the most disturbing part of all, God never interrupts the story. No fire from heaven, no angel, no booming voices, no immediate judgment, just silence. Many of us believe in a loving God who is all-knowing and all-powerful. Yet there are so many horrifying things in our world that are difficult to reconcile with that idea that God created everything good. And honestly, Judges 19 forces that tension directly into your face. Because this isn't mythology polished up to make humanity look noble. This isn't propaganda pretending religious people are always heroes. The Bible records humanity exactly as it is, violent, cowardly, tribal, and self-preserving, capable of horrifying evils. And strangely enough, that raw honesty is one of the reasons why I trust it, because fake religious books sanitize people, but the Bible exposes them. So today we're talking about one of the darkest chapters in Scripture, not for shock value, or sensationalized trauma, but because buried inside this horrifying story is a warning about what happens when human hearts become hardened and when women become disposable, when religion replaces righteousness, and when everyone does what is right in their own eyes. Hi, this is Sacred Spills, where we explore how eternity breathes through the ordinary. And in this series, I'm calling The Unpreached. We're going to talk about Judges 19. If you've ever heard Judges 19 talked about at all, it's usually summarized with the one verse. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That line appears near the end of Judges, and honestly, it's the summary statement for the whole book. Judges is chaos, and it's a downward spiral. Every cycle gets darker. Israel rebels, people suffer. God raises a judge that improves it briefly, and then it collapses again. And by the time you get to Judges 19, there's almost no heroes left. That's important because people sometimes read Old Testament narratives as endorsements, but biblical narratives are descriptive, not prescriptive. Only meaning the Bible tells you what happened, not necessarily what God approved of. And Judges 19 is one of the clearest examples of that distinction. Nobody in the story acts honorably, not the mob or the old man or even the Levite husband. Well, especially not him. But most sermons won't go deeply into this chapter because how do you even preach this? How do you talk about it, a woman being sacrificed by the very men who should have protected her? How do you wrestle with the silence of God in moments of human evil? It's uncomfortable. And honestly, I think most churches are afraid of uncomfortable. But the Bible isn't afraid of uncomfortable. The Bible drags human darkness into the light and forces us to look at it. And maybe we need that because we still live in a world where vulnerable people are sacrificed for the comfort and survival of powerful people. We just package it differently now. What does the text actually say? Let's walk through the story carefully. Judges 19 opens with a Levite and his concubine. Right away, there's tension. A concubine is not treated like a fully honored wife in ancient culture. She occupied this tragic middle space, protected enough to belong to a man, but vulnerable enough to still be treated as property. The text says she leaves him and returns to her father's house. Translations differ here. Some suggest that she was unfaithful, and others suggest she became angry or was mistreated. But honestly, the wording is ambiguous enough that we should be careful not to assume that she's the villain, especially because the rest of the story tells us a lot about the man she was living with. After 4 months, this guy, this Levite, finally travels to go get her back. And at first things seem surprisingly warm. Her father welcomes him enthusiastically, and they have a feast. He urges him to stay longer. The hospitality is almost excessive, and hospitality matters deeply in the ancient Near East, as we'll find out a little bit later. People didn't have hotels. Traveling was dangerous. To refuse shelter to someone could literally mean death for them. So hospitality wasn't just politeness, it was morality. But eventually, they leave late in the day, and this is where the story starts building tension. They pass by the town Jubis, which later becomes Jerusalem. But the Levite refused to stay there because it's a foreign city inhabited by Jebusites or Canaanites. Instead, he insists on staying among his own people. In his ethnocentric pride, he assumes that his people would be better than the others, whoever the others are that he's othered, and he couldn't be more wrong in this case. But I also wonder, as the day wears on, maybe it was more dangerous for him to show up later in the day. There would have been more opportunities for more people to see him in the city square in the closer city than in the further one. So that's a possibility too, but it's his pride, it's his prejudice that causes him to make this fateful choice. There is something tragically ironic about it, because the supposed people of God became more dangerous than the pagans may have been. This should stop us in our tracks, because religious identity does not automatically equal moral righteousness. And honestly, history proves that over and over and over again. So they arrive in Gibeah, a town belonging to the tribe of Benjamin, and nobody offers them shelter. That detail would have shocked ancient readers. This is already signaling societal collapse. Finally, an old man who is not from that city originally takes them in. And if you're familiar with the Genesis 19 story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you probably already start feeling those parallels forming. A traveler, a house, nightfall, mob gathering outside. The Bible wants you to notice the connections. Israel has become what Sodom was, and that's the point. So then the men of the city surround the house, demanding the Levite be brought outside. And that's where people usually start mentally disconnecting from the story, because it becomes unbearable. But stay with me, because this is where scripture exposes humanity at its worst. The old man panics, and in a horrifying attempt to protect his male guests, he offers his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. And every time I read that part, I feel sick, because what kind of world produces that response? What kind of culture values male honor so highly that women become bargaining chips? And before we act morally superior, we should probably ask ourselves how often society still sacrifices vulnerable people to protect power, comfort, image, or status. Maybe we don't throw people outside literal doors anymore, but people are still abandoned every day to protect the reputations of others. Some are discarded for convenience or to protect the system. And then comes the moment that honestly reveals the Levite's character more than anything else. The text says he seized his concubine and pushed her outside. He handed her over to save himself. The Hebrew narrative style is subtle but devastating. It lets action reveal the character of the man, and his actions are cowardly, self-protecting, and self-preserving. Could you imagine the terror, the sounds outside the door, the uncertainty, the desperation? Would the door hold? Could they survive? Would anyone come to help? And this woman, who had already fled from this man once, is shoved into darkness by the very person who should have protected her. That detail destroys me, because betrayal by evil people is horrifying. But betrayal by someone trusted, that cuts different. And here's the question hovering over the entire chapter. Where's God? Why doesn't he intervene? Why is heaven silent? And I need to be careful here, because I don't want to offer shallow answers for deep pain. The Bible never says God approved of this, not once. And in fact, the entire structure of Judges screams the opposite. The parallels with Sodom and Gomorrah would lead one to believe that God wanted to stop this kind of injustice. This story is presented as evidence of national corruption. God's silence still feels unsettling, because sometimes we want immediate intervention. We want justice now. We want immediate rescue, because there is suffering in the world, and yet we still hear silence. And if we're honest, That's one of the hardest parts of faith. People experience evil every day and ask, where's God? That question isn't theoretical, it's personal, and scripture does not always give us a neat answer. Sometimes it simply forces us to sit inside the grief. One thing the Bible constantly shows is this: God allowing humans agency means that humans can commit horrifying evil, and human evil often harms innocent people. That may not be a satisfying answer emotionally, but it's real. Love without freedom is coercion, and freedom means that people can be monstrous. And Judges 19 is what happens when human hearts are left unchecked. Then comes the verse that, to me, reveals the entire tragedy of this man. Morning comes. The woman collapses at the doorway. Her hands are on the threshold. That image alone is haunting. She made it back to the house, back to the place where she should have been protected, and the door was never opened to her all night. Then the Levite comes out and says, "Get up, let's go." No panic, no grief, no tenderness. Just get up. It's chilling. Maybe this is speculation, but honestly, that one line makes me wonder if the coldness existed long before that night. Maybe that's why she fled him in the first place. I think of my favorite verse from Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Human beings are capable of terrifying self-deception. We think we're good because we know the religious language, because we belong to the right tribe, because we identify as moral people. Meanwhile, our hearts can be stone. And that's what scares me about this story. Not just the mob, the ordinary selfishness, the cowardice, the willingness to sacrifice someone else to survive. Because if I'm completely honest, I don't know with certainty what fear can make me do. And I think humility matters here. It's easy to stand at a distance condemning ancient peoples. It's harder to admit, under enough pressure, human beings are terrifyingly fragile morally. Then comes the part that everyone remembers. The Levite cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends them throughout Israel. And yes, it's horrifying. But culturally, this was meant to be a national alarm signal, and it leads to civil war. It's like saying, look at that evil happening among us. And ironically, the man who failed to protect her now uses her death as political outrage. He has commoditized her body yet again. Even in her death, her body becomes an object used by men. But all Israel responds, such a thing has never happened. But the tragedy is, it absolutely became possible because their hearts had already been drifting for generations. Society rarely collapses at once. Moral collapse happens gradually, compromise by compromise, silence by silence, until eventually people do things once considered unimaginable. So in their hearts, there was the propensity for this kind of evil to happen, even if they were not visibly aware of it before this incident. And this is where the story confronts us spiritually, because the easy thing is to identify the others as being villains, those out there. But scripture is constantly dragging the spotlight inward. Jesus said hatred begins in the heart. Violence begins in the heart. Adultery begins in the heart. Sin starts internally before it manifests externally. And apart from transformation, human beings bend towards selfishness. I know that's unpopular language today. People prefer follow your heart. Biblically, that's dangerous advice because the heart is distorted by sin. It's cruel, it's tribal, it's self-protecting. And Judges 19 is what happens when people collectively live according to disordered desires instead of God's character. And honestly, this chapter makes me grateful for Jesus in a completely different way, because Jesus steps into a world exactly like the one people in Judges were living in. It was a violent, patriarchal world where the vulnerable were disposable, where 2/3 of the population were considered slaves, and the Roman Empire was the might of all things. And instead of sacrificing others to save himself, he sacrifices himself for others. And this gives us the model to live by. Jesus is the words of God substantiated in human form. That is a complete reversal of Judges 19. Think about it. The Levite pushes someone else inside, out the door to die for him, but Jesus walks outside the city himself. The contrast matters. One operates from self-preservation, and the other from self-giving love. And suddenly the silence of Judges makes the cross even louder, because God eventually does speak, not merely through commandments, but through embodiment, through Christ showing humanity what goodness actually looks like. I need to see that and understand that, because I know what my own heart is capable of apart from God. I know fear can make me selfish. Pain can make people's hearts hard. Tribalism can make people cruel. That's why I believe the scripture from Jeremiah so strongly, that my heart is wicked and deceitful above all things, but how my heart is of stone. But the quote from Ezekiel 36 is, I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. This is not behavioral modification. It's heart transformation. Because laws alone don't heal people. Information alone doesn't heal people. Humans need inward transformation. The message of Jesus Christ is not in its core, try harder to be good. It's your heart must become new. You must be born again. All things become new in light of a spiritual rebirth. You can't just go through the motions and try harder and do it on your own. You're just trimming away at the edges. You have to be completely restored and transformed internally. And that's the hope buried underneath even the horrifying passages like Judges 19. Not that humanity is secretly good or that we can do it on our own somehow, but that God has refused to abandon humanity to its own corruption forever. So this story leaves me with the old phrase, but for the grace of God, there go I. Not because I want to join a violent mob tomorrow, because I know fear and self-preservation and tribalism exists in my heart as well as all of ours. And maybe the real warning from Judges 19 is not, look how evil these people were. Maybe it's pay attention to what humans become when God's ways are abandoned. Because every generation thinks it's more enlightened than the last. And every generation still finds new ways to dehumanize people. And that's why I cling to Jesus. Not because Christians are automatically morally superior. History proves this otherwise. But because Christ gives us a radically different model. Power, sacrifice, love, dignity, and mercy. And honestly, without that model, I don't trust human nature very much at all. So I want to ask you, do you think you would have acted differently in that house? Could you face death instead of sacrificing someone weaker? Have you ever wrestled with how fear changes human behavior? And do you think Christ changes the way we approach those questions? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you're interested in authentic conversations about gritty, uncomfortable, unpreached parts of scriptures, subscribe and check out the Unpreached playlist. And if you want another story that explores human weakness, fear, and God working through deeply flawed people, watch my video on Aaron next. Until next time, let's keep soft hearts and teachable spirits as we grow in our understanding of God. Thank you.